The smell of his morning coffee rose between us when my husband kissed the same hand he'd used to hit me the night before. Still, I set his breakfast down softly, pretending our marriage hadn't cracked in a single slap. As the steam drifted upward, he blamed stress, blamed timing, blamed me. Anything to keep our relationship looking clean. While his excuses filled the kitchen, I finally heard the truth our vows had been drowning out. The same warm mug reminded me I owed myself more than a wife's silence. That's when I pressed record and decided this marriage would end with justice, not fear. Before we start, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. If you enjoy the story, please hit like, subscribe, and join our community. It really helps us grow. The slap landed before I even understood he'd lifted his hand. A sharp crack split the kitchen air, loud enough to make our dog, Baxter, whimper from under the table, but somehow not loud enough for the neighbors to hear. That was always how it was with Derek. Damage just quiet enough to stay private. The overhead light buzzed like a dying insect, flickering against the half-empty bottle of wine, sweating on the counter. It was nearly midnight, and the whole house smelled like stale Cabernet and the burnt edge of the chicken he'd refused to eat because it was over-seasoned. My cheeks stung in waves, but he was already turning away, shaking out his hand like I'd made it inconveniently hot. "This again?" he muttered, voice thick from drinking. "God, Claire, you don't stop. You never stop." My fingers hovered near my face, but I didn't touch it. Touching it would make it real. Instead, I stared at the laptop screen glowing on the island, the overdue notice for the electric bill he swore he'd paid last week. The cursor pulsed over the words, "Payment incomplete," just like the other two bills, just like the checking account that had mysteriously dropped a few $100s, just like the passwords he suddenly changed for security reasons. He'd called my questions nagging 3 times already. I counted because that's what you do when you're trying to measure the temperature of a man who denies he's boiling. I swallowed, tasting metallic fear. "The bill is overdue, Derek. Again. And the bank app shows transfers you didn't tell me about." He laughed, one sharp exhale through his nose. "I told you, it's handled. You don't need to micromanage everything. You'd have no roof over your head without me, remember? Maybe put more energy into your little cupcake hobby instead of interrogating me." My throat tightened. He said little cupcake hobby the same way someone might say your childish scribbles or that dumb thing you do to feel important. I stared at his glassy eyes, the way he swayed just slightly, the sour edge of wine on his breath drifting between us. Something hot and solid rose in my chest. "I pay half the mortgage," I said quietly, firmly. "Half. And the bookkeeping, too. So stop acting like I'm living here on your charity. I'm allowed to ask about our accounts." His jaw snapped shut. A muscle twitched just beneath the skin. He stepped forward, and the space between us shrank until my lower back touched the cold counter. He didn't touch me, yet, but the way he leaned in, chest to chest, was its own kind of cage. "Don't talk to me like that," he said. "Don't you dare talk to me like that in my house." "Our house," I whispered, because if I didn't say it, I'd lose the tiny piece of reality I was clinging to. His eyes narrowed, and when I didn't look away, when I refused to tuck my chin down like I usually did, his arm moved fast. The slap wasn't a movie slap. It wasn't dramatic. It was flat and clean, a wide, practiced arc that ended with the scrape of his wedding ring dragging fire across my cheekbone. My head snapped sideways into the cabinet door, and the dull thump of it echoed a second after the sting. For a heartbeat, everything was quiet except my own pulse roaring in my ears. Then came his breathless, stumbling apology. "Jesus, Claire, stop being so dramatic. It was barely a tap. You pushed me. You can't wind me up like that. Then you know how you get." His voice pitched high, then low, then soft, like he was auditioning versions of remorse until he found one he liked. He kept glancing everywhere but the right side of my face. My cheek burned so fiercely it felt hot to the touch, though I still hadn't touched it. I tasted copper. Maybe from biting my tongue, maybe just fear. He hovered for a moment, as if waiting for me to comfort him, to say it was fine, that I forgave him. that we could go to bed and pretend none of it had happened. But when I didn't move, didn't speak, he backed away with a frustrated sigh and left the kitchen lights on behind him. Another small punishment. When he finally shut the bedroom door, I walked to the bathroom like someone piloting a body from a distance. The overhead light flickered once before settling into a harsh, white glare. I braced myself on the sink and turned my face toward the mirror. The red print wasn't sharp yet, just a flushed bloom beneath the skin, the shape of fingertips beginning to rise like something waking up. My eyes looked stranger than the bruise, wide, alert, like they were just now seeing the last 5 years clearly. My hand trembled as I lifted my phone. The shutter clicked, once, twice, enough to capture what he would deny in the morning. I breathed out slowly, the air shuddering on its way out, and to the reflection that still looked like me but felt like someone else entirely, I whispered, "Tomorrow morning, you're not just making breakfast, you're making a plan." The next morning, I set his coffee on the table, and before I could pull my hand back, Derek caught it, lifting it to his lips and kissing the same knuckles he'd used to hit me hours earlier. His mouth was warm, my skin crawled. "Thanks, babe," he murmured, like nothing had happened. I smiled, small, practiced, and with my free hand I slid my phone onto the counter beside the sugar jar. The screen went dark. The recording was already running. The dawn light seeped into the kitchen in soft gold stripes, but nothing about the room felt calm. My cheek pulsed under the layers of concealer I dabbed on with trembling fingers. Every time I smiled, the skin tugged painfully, reminding me what he'd done, what he claimed he barely remembered. The frying pan hissed as eggs bubbled around the edges, and the coffee maker clicked in steady rhythm behind me. I clung to those sounds, things I could control, while Derek strolled in like a man entering his domain. He always walked with that slow confidence, like the world parted for him automatically. He slid up behind me, his arm wrapping around my waist. I stiffened, but he didn't notice. Or maybe he did and decided it wasn't his problem. "Hey," he whispered into my hair, breath warm and heavy with the mint gum he chewed to hide last night's wine. "I'm really sorry about last night." The apology hung in the air for half a second. Then came the rest. "But babe, if you hadn't pushed so hard, things wouldn't have gotten out of hand. You know that, right?" There it was, the flip, the shift from remorse to accusation, smooth as butter melting on the stove. Like he couldn't help but make the bruise on my face a lesson I needed to learn. I kept scraping the spatula across the pan, forcing my voice steady. "So you admit you hit me." He froze. Then he let out a nervous little laugh, the kind that tried to sound dismissive but landed sharp. "Don't be dramatic, Claire. It was just a slap. You act like I punched you or something." He moved past me, opening the fridge. "You've got to stop acting abused every time we argue." Acting abused. As if it were a role I'd auditioned for. As if he were the victim of my performance. My phone recorded every word, its tiny microphone gathering the sounds of Derek dismissing, excusing, rewriting reality. The soft scrape of toast as I buttered it was the only thing masking the slight shake in my hands. "I just don't want it to ever happen again," I said. Quiet, controlled, words chosen with surgical precision. He glanced up from his plate. "Then don't push me like that." The sentence landed heavier than the slap. There was no apology left in him now, just the smug certainty that he'd regained control of the narrative. He ate quickly, leaving a scatter of crumbs and the faint smell of his cologne settling into the air like smoke. When he stood to leave, he tugged his tie straight and leaned down, palm cupping my cheek right over the bruise beneath the makeup. "You're fine," he said. "We're fine. Stop overthinking." Then he left. The front door shut with a decisive thud, followed by the sound of his footsteps on the walkway and the engine of his car revving to life. Silence flooded the house. Real silence. Heavy, dense, honest. I exhaled shakily, then reached for my phone. The screen lit up, timer still running. I stopped the recording and listened. His voice filled the kitchen, minimizing, excusing, blaming, and I felt my stomach twist, not with fear this time, but something clearer, sharper. A line had been crossed, and he wasn't going to walk back over it with a kiss on the hand. I locked the door, grabbed my keys, and tucked the phone into my bag. He always joked I didn't need a lawyer because I had him. But that morning, for the first time in years, I realized I did need one, and I was done asking his permission. Aunt Lisa didn't gasp when she saw the bruise peeking through the edge of my makeup. She didn't clutch her chest or whisper, "Oh my God." She just pushed a box of tissues toward me across her polished desk and said quietly, "I told your grandmother this condo would save you someday. I didn't realize how." Her calm cut deeper than pity would have. The soft hum of her office printer filled the silence, mixing with the faint smell of coffee that had soaked into the carpet over years of long cases. Her walls were lined with color-coded files, neat rows that made the space feel safe, organized, predictable. Nothing like the chaos of my kitchen last night. My fingers fumbled with my phone as I pulled up the breakfast recording. I hit play, and Derek's voice spilled into the room, lazy, dismissive, blaming. Lisa didn't flinch. She just nodded along, jotting short notes, her pen scratching softly against the yellow legal pad. When the audio ended, I showed her the photo of my cheek. The red handprint looked even angrier on the bright screen. "Claire," she said, her voice steady but heavy. "How often has he raised his voice at you, blocked a doorway, grabbed your wrists? Anything like that?" Her eyes met mine, not accusing, not shocked, just waiting. I opened my mouth and the truth came out in clumsy pieces. The nights he cornered me during arguments, the mornings he called me sensitive when I cried, the way he'd grip my arms a little too hard when he was stressed, then say I bruised too easily. I heard myself list things I'd laughed off, excused, swallowed. Saying them out loud made my stomach churn. It felt like reading off charges I wasn't ready to admit were real. When I finally stopped talking, Lisa reached for her laptop and typed a few things, her brows narrowing with practiced precision. "You mentioned the condo," she said. "You still have the keys?" I hesitated. I never told Derek I kept it. He called it Grandma's shoebox and kept saying we should sell it for something more useful. I told him it sold years ago. My voice cracked with embarrassment, as if hiding something I owned was the shameful part. Lisa swiveled the laptop so I could see the screen. "This," she said, pointing to the LLC paperwork dated in her tidy signature, "is why your grandmother trusted me. This condo is legally yours, completely. It is not marital property. He has no claim to it and no access to it." For a moment, the air in my chest loosened. A safe place. A door he couldn't unlock. An income stream he couldn't drain. All this time, while he made jokes about how lucky I was to have him, I'd had an entire escape route sitting across town under my own name. "He thinks we have no backup plan," I whispered. Lisa nodded once. "You've had one all along. You just didn't think you'd ever need it." Her words landed with a quiet thud of truth. She leaned back, folding her hands. "Here's what you're going to do. Keep documenting everything. Texts, recordings, photos. Go to a doctor today. Have them log the injury. And Claire." She paused until I met her eyes. "If this wasn't the first time he's crossed the line, physically, or even come close, you should consider a protective order. He's already showing a pattern." The word pattern made my skin crawl because it meant this wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a slope, and I'd been sliding without noticing. When I left her office, the afternoon sun hit the hallway's glass wall and lit up the folder she'd handed me. Copies of the deed, the LLC documents, a checklist of next steps. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like the weight of a decision was already settling into my arms. As I walked toward the elevator, the bruise on my cheek throbbed in slow, angry pulses. But for the first time since last night, I felt something steadier underneath the pain. The first piece of justice I was going to serve wasn't to Derek, it was to myself, by refusing to pretend any of this was normal ever again. Derek lounged on the couch that night like a man who'd never done anything wrong a day in his life. His feet were crossed on the ottoman, a beer sweating onto a coaster, and the soft glow of the floor lamp lit the right side of his face, the same side he refused to let linger near my bruised cheek. He flicked through the home security app on his phone, grinning with the self-satisfaction of a magician showing off a new trick. "See this?" he said, tapping the screen. "No more blind spots. I tightened everything up. This place is a fortress now." I managed a polite smile, though my stomach gave a slow, twisting roll. A fortress. That's what he liked to call it. A home he protected, a wife he protected, always the hero in his own story. But tonight, when he said blind spots, something inside me clicked. Because if he'd eliminated them, then the slap, the whole thing, might not be invisible after all. He shifted closer, angling the phone so I could see the feed. A crisp view of our living room, then the kitchen, then the hallway. "Look at that resolution," he bragged. "Clients eat this stuff up. They want to feel safe." Safe. I wondered what word he would use for the bruise under my makeup. He kept talking about a big client who'd praised him, about how much responsibility he carried, about how exhausting it was to protect families who don't understand the tech. His voice turned syrupy with pride. Every time I adjusted my hair and the light caught my cheekbone, he dropped his gaze, changed the subject, or shifted the angle of the lamp. "Does it record audio or just video?" I asked casually, choosing a moment when he was distracted. He rolled his eyes so dramatically the couch cushions rustled. "Both, obviously. That's the whole point." Then he flicked my forehead with a lazy finger. "Don't worry your pretty little head about the technical stuff. That's why you have me." The condescension stung, but not as much as the memory of where I'd been standing when he hit me. Center of the living room, right beneath the span of that wide-angle lens he had just proudly demonstrated. If the camera had been rolling, if it had captured everything, this wasn't just my word and a photo anymore. Later, the house settled into its nighttime rhythm. The click of Derek turning off the TV, the dull thud of his footsteps down the hall, the creak of the bathroom door, then the rush of water as the shower roared to life. Steam began to seep into the hallway like a signal. I waited 10 slow seconds. Then I moved. His laptop sat open on the home office desk, still logged into his admin dashboard, the hub he used to manage client systems and ours. The room smelled faintly of sawdust and the cologne he sprayed on his jacket earlier. My fingers hovered over the trackpad for a moment before I clicked into the archive folder. There it was, a list of time-stamped clips, a date, a range, the exact window matching last night's argument. My pulse pounded in my ears as I opened the first file. I didn't let it play. My body couldn't handle watching it yet, but I saw enough in the tiny preview frame to know the system had caught the moment. My head jerking, Derek's raised arm, the ring glinting. My breath shook as I plugged in a USB and started copying. Each file transferred with a progress bar that crawled slowly, tauntingly across the screen. I backed them up to my cloud account too, fingers trembling as I typed in my password. Somewhere down the hall, the shower shut off with a metallic thud. I yanked the USB free, closed all windows, cleared the recent activity, and gently shut the laptop as if it were made of glass. My heart hammered so hard I thought the sound alone would expose me. I stepped out of the office just as the bathroom door opened and steam rolled into the hallway. Derek hummed to himself, off-key, carefree, unburdened. He had no idea. I had bruises he dismissed. I had audio he shrugged off. But now I had something else. His own product, his own proof, his own hands captured in motion, and he didn't know I'd seen it. When the woman he'd always described as crazy answered my call and quietly said, "He hit you too, didn't he?" The floor of my denial finally gave out beneath me. I had been sitting at my small kitchen table, laptop open, the afternoon light slanting across the wood. My finger hovered over the call button for a full minute before I pressed it, my pulse thudding in my ears. I expected her to ignore me or hang up or ask who I was. I did not expect her to sound unsurprised. Her voice was steady, tired in a way that felt too familiar. "Are you safe right now?" she asked next. No one had asked me that so directly except the hotline counselor. Hearing it from her, the woman he'd laughed about, dismissed, mocked for years, hit something raw inside me. The day before, Aunt Lisa had emailed me a background packet. "Just information," she said, "nothing you have to act on." But tucked near the end of the report, among addresses and employment records, was a name I hadn't said aloud since a Christmas years ago: Melissa Grant. I remembered Derek ripping up a card that arrived from her, scoffing that she was obsessed, unstable, trying to insert herself into his life even after the divorce. He'd made jokes for years. She went nuts after I left. She was always drama. She even tried filing something against me. Can you believe that? But the report showed something different. A protective order, filed in another state, withdrawn a few weeks later. The notes chilled me. Mutual reconciliation. Lack of cooperation from victim. Victim. The word lodged in my throat. I found Melissa's profile online. Modest, quiet, mostly photos of her dog and hiking trails. I messaged her once, just a sentence. "Hi. I think we have something difficult in common and I don't know who else to ask." She replied within 10 minutes. "If this is about Derek, I'm willing to talk." So now, on the video call, her face appeared. Eyes cautious, shoulders drawn tight like someone bracing for a long-delayed blow. I told her about the argument. I didn't say slap at first. I didn't know how to form the word in front of a stranger. But when I held up a blurred screenshot from the security footage, just outlines, not details, she didn't look confused. She didn't ask questions. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she didn't speak at all. Then her voice cracked open something in both of us. "He used to block me in the hallway," she said softly. "He'd stand in the doorway so I couldn't walk past until I agreed with him. He'd punch the wall right next to my head, grab my arms, hard." She held up her wrist as if the ghost of his fingers still lived there. "He'd tell me the bruises were my fault because I made him upset." My throat tightened. I could almost feel the phantom weight of Derek's hand on my own arm. "He told you that too, didn't he?" she asked. I nodded. My voice barely came out. "He said I provoked him." Her expression twisted with something like sorrow and fury blended together. "He always said that. Every single time." She told me he shoved her once into a doorframe so hard she saw stars, that she filed a restraining order in a moment of terrified clarity, that he showed up at her apartment crying, apologizing, begging, promising therapy, promising change, promising he'd die without her. He said no one would believe me anyway because he installs security systems for a living. He said people trust him to protect them. She swallowed. And I believed that. I believed him. Every sentence she spoke felt like someone was reading my own thoughts aloud. The same apologies, the same minimization, the same script Derek used on me, word for word. My skin crawled. My heartbeat thundered. This wasn't a slip. It wasn't isolated. It was a pattern, a practiced one. "I thought I was the only one," I whispered. "You never were," she said. "He just needs each of us to think that." She asked if I was planning to report anything. I hesitated before admitting I was gathering evidence. Her eyes sharpened, not with judgment, but with a kind of fierce protectiveness. "If you pursue a protective order," she said, "I'll write a statement. I'll testify if you need me to. I don't want him doing this to anyone else." The offer made my breath catch. This woman, who owed me nothing, who Derek had convinced me was unstable, was offering to stand beside me, because she already knew the ending to a story I was still trying to understand. We talked for a few more minutes, small details, safety advice, her dog barking in the background. When we finally said goodbye, she gave me a sad smile. "Take care of yourself, Claire. Don't let him tell you who you are." The call ended. My screen went black, reflecting only my own face back at me. The bruise on my cheek had begun to fade, but the truth Melissa gave me had carved something deeper. The story I'd told myself, that Derek had never done this before, that maybe it really was a one-time thing, shattered. He'd done it before. He'd blamed before. He'd convinced another woman to stay quiet before. And now, finally, there was a crack in the story he used to control us all. Today I understand that truth has a way of finding its own witnesses, especially when a man has spent years trying to silence them. The woman on the hotline didn't ask what I'd done to set him off. She didn't ask if I'd yelled first, or if I was sure it wasn't just an accident, or if maybe he'd been drinking and I should cut him some slack. She asked one thing, in a steady voice that wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't know I needed. "Do you feel safe going home tonight?" No one had ever started there before. I sat in my parked car outside the townhouse, fingers locked around the steering wheel so tightly, the leather pressed ridges into my palms. The porch light was on. Derek always left it on, said it made our home look put together. But tonight, the warm light felt accusing, like the house itself was waiting for me to pretend nothing had happened. I stared at the front door and dialed the crisis line number Naomi had slid across Aunt Lisa's desk. My thumb hovered for a second, trembling, then pressed call. A soft click, then a woman's calm voice. "Women's Advocacy and Crisis Line. This is Angela. How can I help you tonight?" I swallowed, my throat tight. Something happened. My husband... The words snagged. He hit me. I expected the silence that usually followed those words when I told myself them in the mirror. Hesitation, confusion, disbelief. Instead, her tone didn't shift at all. "Thank you for calling," she said. "You're not alone. Can you tell me what's going on right now?" So I did. My voice shook as I described the slap, the sting, the way he apologized while blaming me in the same breath. I told her about the breakfast recording, the security footage. I told her about Melissa, the ex-wife who didn't sound crazy at all when she said my experience matched hers. The whole time, Angela's voice stayed steady, grounded, like she'd heard 1,000 versions of my story and understood every contour. Not once did she suggest I was exaggerating. Not once did she ask what I'd done to provoke him. When I paused to breathe, she filled the silence gently. "What you're describing fits the cycle of abuse. The emotional part often starts long before the physical. Things like gaslighting, financial control, minimizing your reactions, they're all forms of harm." The word harm hung in the air of my car, mixing with the faint scent of old coffee from the cup holder and the cold February air leaking through the cracked window. She continued, "And people like your husband, men who pride themselves on being protectors, charmers, community helpers, they often rely on that reputation to discredit you. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're dealing with someone practiced in manipulation." A strange relief spread through me. Someone else naming what I had been trying not to see. Then we built a plan. Together, step by step, she helped me map out what to pack quietly. Documents, medication, important receipts, a spare phone charger, a change of clothes. "Keep the bag somewhere he won't look," she advised. "Hall closets, behind winter coats, places that look boring." We talked about keys, house, car, mailbox, and where to keep backups. About Derek's schedule and the windows of time when he was reliably gone. About leaving fast if things escalated. No debates, no explanations. When I mentioned the condo, she paused. "That's a safe exit point," she said. "Some women don't have that. You do. Use it." She told me to save copies of every piece of evidence somewhere he couldn't reach. Cloud storage, a trusted friend, a physical USB hidden outside the house. I felt my pulse steady as she spoke, like I was assembling armor I didn't know I was allowed to wear. Then, gently, "If you want to file a police report or seek a protective order, someone from our office can go with you. You never have to do that alone." I hadn't realized how tight my chest had been until something inside me loosened. For so long, Derek had been the narrator of my life, defining what counted as a real problem, what was just a fight, what I was allowed to feel. Now, another voice existed, and it wasn't afraid of him. When the call finally ended, I sat in the quiet car, engine off, the cold seeping into my fingertips. I felt both terrified and strangely steadier. Like the ground beneath me wasn't solid yet, but it wasn't quicksand anymore either. For years, Derek's voice had been the only one describing our relationship. Now there were others, women who recognized the pattern, who named it without flinching. And as I tucked my phone onto the passenger seat, I realized something simple and powerful. I was ready to add my voice to the official record. When I told Derek I'd filed a police report, he laughed, an ugly barking sound that bounced off the kitchen walls. "You think anyone's going to believe Cupcake Hannah over the security expert?" he sneered, using the nickname he pulled out whenever he wanted to remind me I was small, silly, harmless. That was the last moment I cared who believed him. Hours earlier, I'd been sitting under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the precinct, the air smelling faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Naomi sat beside me, her presence calm and steady, like she'd done this 1,000 times. Maybe she had. The officer, a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a wedding ring he kept twisting, listened as I explained what happened. My voice wavered at first, but Naomi's hand on my forearm anchored me. I pulled up the bruise photos on my phone, the ones from the morning after. The officer leaned forward, brows drawing together. Then came the breakfast recording. Derek's voice filled the small interview room, dismissive, mocking, casually cruel. "Don't be dramatic. It was just a slap. Stop acting abused. Don't push me like that." The officer didn't react, but his pen paused for a beat. Finally, Naomi helped me load the security clip onto a flash drive, and we watched it together. The moment played in grainy clarity. Derek advancing, my body jerking sideways, my hand flying to my cheek. Even muted, the violence felt loud. The officer hit pause. He stared at the frozen frame of Derek's raised arm, then back at me. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll take the report." He entered everything carefully, methodically. Dates, times, audio, video, screenshots. He didn't promise he could solve my life. He didn't give me some polished speech about justice, but he didn't dismiss me either, and that alone felt like oxygen filling my lungs. When he handed me the case number, printed neatly on a slip of paper, my hands trembled. "This will support a protective order petition if you choose to file one," he said. "You did the right thing coming in." Those words stayed with me as I drove home, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Derek was in the kitchen when I walked in, pacing, his phone on the counter. He looked up sharply. "Where the hell were you?" I set my bag down. "I went to the police. There's a report now and evidence on file." His laugh cut through the air like broken glass. "A report? Jesus, Claire, you're destroying my career over one argument. One." He jabbed a finger toward me. "You won't get a dime if you play it that way." I stayed still, steady. He hated when I didn't flinch. "You're being dramatic," he snapped. "A traitor. And when this goes to court, I'll make sure they see how unstable you are. You think you'll win? You think anyone's going to choose you over me?" He stepped closer, face flushed with anger. The same heat I'd seen in his eyes before the slap. Something sour, volatile, unpredictable. For years, I would have tried to reason with him, explain myself, beg him not to twist the truth again, but not this time. I lifted my chin and met his gaze evenly. "I didn't go there to destroy your career," I said. "I went there to protect my life." I paused, letting the words settle like dust. Those are not the same thing. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, a stutter in his confidence, a split-second pulse of uncertainty, a crack in the mask. He realized I wasn't bluffing, and I realized I didn't need him to believe me anymore. Today I understand that the moment you stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding, you is the moment you start getting free. The first night I locked the door of the condo, he didn't even know I still owned. The silence was so loud it made my throat ache. It wasn't peaceful, not at first. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ribs and asks, "Are you really doing this?" And then, slowly, it softened, until, for the first time in months, I slept. Getting there took planning. Quiet, tedious, careful planning, the kind I never imagined doing for my own safety. Over several days, with Aunt Lisa coaching me by phone and text, I staged my exit in pieces. A tote bag of toiletries slipped into the trunk when Derek took the dog for a walk. A folder of documents slid between baking trays when I organized the pantry. My grandmother's recipe binder tucked under sweaters I donated so often he didn't even look anymore. The baking tools were trickier. My business equipment always caught his attention because he loved reminding me it was just a hobby. So I moved them slowly, a mixer attachment here, cookie cutters wrapped in dish towels there. I kept my face neutral the whole time, smiling when he mocked my moodiness, laughing at his jokes, pretending nothing in me had shifted. But something had, something big. The night it finally happened, we just finished another argument, one that started because I asked him not to yell at me across the room, and he said I was overreacting again. His voice grew louder, sharper, until he suddenly grabbed his keys and announced he needed drinks with the guys. The front door slammed so hard the walls shook. The sound felt like permission. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, breathing through the tremble in my hands, then moved fast. I grabbed the pre-packed suitcase from behind the washer, slipped the USB with the footage into the inner pocket, took my laptop, my charger, my phone, and the small envelope of cash Aunt Lisa insisted I keep hidden. Baxter watched from his bed, ears down, tail tucked. I knelt and kissed his head. "I'll come back for you," I whispered. "Soon, I promise." Then I walked out, quiet, deliberate, and didn't look back. The drive across town felt unreal, the streetlights streaking across the windshield like smudges of gold. My heartbeat was too loud, too fast, but underneath it was something steadier, a direction, a place Derek had no map to. The condo building looked exactly as I remembered. Slightly outdated brick, narrow hallways, the faint smell of someone's dinner drifting through the vents. The tenant had moved out 2 weeks earlier, and I hadn't had the strength to tell Derek. Now, thank God I hadn't. Inside, the place felt small but clean. Fresh paint, empty rooms, a mattress I'd ordered last year for the tenant still wrapped in crisp sheets, and near the window, exactly where I left it after the tenant moved out, sat my grandmother's rocking chair, its faded cushions worn in the shape of every story she used to tell me. I leaned against the closed door as my breathing steadied. Then I unlocked my phone and typed a message I'd rehearsed for days but never believed I'd actually send. "I won't be home tonight. I need space. I have a lawyer and I've filed a report. Don't come looking for me." I hit send. My hand shook, but I didn't undo it, didn't apologize, didn't soften the edges. The calls started within minutes. First, Derek's voice was syrupy, thick with false remorse. "Baby, please, come home, we can talk. I'm sorry, I just need you here." Then the tone shifted, cold, clipped. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Come home before you make this worse for yourself." Then darker. "You think you're going to win? You won't. You're being dramatic. Call me back and fix this quietly." Every voicemail saved, every threat filed away. I curled up on the unfamiliar bed, the sheets cool against my arms, listening not to Derek's footsteps in the hallway, because he didn't know where I was, but to the distant hum of traffic drifting through the window. Fear sat on one side of me, guilt on the other, but woven through both was something else, a thin, steady thread of relief. For the first time in our marriage, he didn't know where I slept, and that truth, quiet and small as it was, felt like the beginning of a life he couldn't reach. The glass walls of the conference room reflected everything: my tense shoulders, Aunt Lisa's calm gaze, Derek's restless foot tapping beneath the table. But what they reflected most clearly was the giant monitor at the front of the room, still dark, waiting. This was his territory, his company, his brand, his identity. the place where he was the expert, the protector, the charming salesman families trusted with their homes and their safety. And today, this room was about to show him for what he really was. Gavin, the HR director, sat at the head of the table with a neat stack of papers and a look that said he'd already read enough to be concerned. He glanced between us, me and Aunt Lisa on one side, Derek and his supervisor on the other. "Thank you all for coming," Gavin began, smoothing a hand over his tie. "Given the nature of the information we received, the police report, and the statement from Ms. Morgan's attorney, we need clarity regarding certain risks." Derek leaned back in his chair like this was an inconvenience, like he had better things to do. "Gavin, come on," he said, annoyed but confident. "This is a misunderstanding, a marital spat blown out of proportion by an emotional wife." He shot me a pointed look, one he thought would intimidate me into silence. It didn't. Gavin rested his elbows on the table. "Is there anything you'd like to disclose before we proceed?" Derek sighed dramatically. "Look, my wife, Claire, has always been sensitive. She thought something minor was a big deal, went to the police without thinking. I'm sure we can resolve it privately." Aunt Lisa didn't give him the courtesy of a pause. She opened her folder and slid a small stack toward Gavin. "This is the police report number, dates, bruise photographs, and a transcript of an audio recording from the morning after the incident." Derek's eyes widened. "Wait, Lisa, seriously?" She didn't acknowledge him. "And," she continued, turning her laptop toward the monitor, "this is footage obtained directly from Derek's own home security system." His company's logo pulsed onto the screen in the corner of the video feed, crisp and unmistakable. Derek's supervisor inhaled sharply, as if that detail alone was a violation of everything they stood for. Then the footage played, muted, grainy, but undeniable. Derek advancing, my body jerking sideways, his arm pulling back, the impact, my hand flying to my face. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the monitor. I watched Derek watch himself, the confidence drained from his face as though someone had pulled the plug. His supervisor stared at him like he was seeing a stranger. Gavin's expression hardened into something clipped and professional. Gavin turned to him. "This is your home system?" Derek swallowed. "Yes." "You installed this yourself?" "Yes, but—" "And you're aware it records audio and video continuously?" His Adam's apple bobbed. Yes." Aunt Lisa slid another document across the table, Melissa's prior protective order notes. "There is also a history that aligns with Ms. Morgan's account." Derek's composure cracked. "This is out of context. It was one time I was under stress, and she pushed me. She provoked me. You know how women can get." His supervisor stiffened. Gavin slowly put down his pen. "You understand," Gavin said, voice suddenly cold, "that our employees are held to strict conduct standards. You enter people's homes. You install surveillance. You represent safety. And now we have credible evidence, recorded on our own product, of domestic violence." Derek opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "Effective immediately," Gavin continued. "You are suspended pending internal investigation. Termination is a likely outcome." The word termination seemed to finally land. Derek turned his fury on me. "You did this," he spat. "You're ruining my life. You think you're some kind of hero because you ran to HR? You won't win. I'll make sure—" I stood before he could finish. My voice didn't shake. "I'm not here to ruin your life," I said. "I'm here because you hurt me, and this company deserves to know what kind of man represents them." He scoffed, but there was fear behind it now. Real fear. The first I'd ever seen on him. I turned to Gavin, softening my tone. "Thank you for taking safety seriously. Not everyone does." He nodded, and something in his expression told me he understood more than he could say. Aunt Lisa gathered her papers with the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen men like Derek dismantle their own reputations before. She opened the conference room door for me, and as I stepped out, I felt the weight shifting. Not all the way, but enough. The glass walls reflected Derek sinking into his chair, his supervisor turning away from him, Gavin writing notes that would shape the rest of his career. For the first time in a long time, my life wasn't the one at risk in that room. His was. The text from Derek came in while I was standing in line at the hardware store, clutching a set of new deadbolts. Just 3 words, smug and careless, as if the whole legal system were a prank I'd tried to play on him. Nice try, Claire. He'd been served at his gym, mid-set, according to one of our mutual friends who happened to be there. A process server had walked right up to him between reps and handed him the protective order packet. The story spread fast. Apparently, he laughed, tossed the envelope onto the bench, and kept lifting like he'd just been handed a flyer for a discount car wash. But the judge wouldn't be laughing. Aunt Lisa moved quickly, stitching together every piece of evidence like she was quilting a bulletproof shield. The bruise photos, the police report, Naomi's documentation of our calls, the therapist's notes from the morning I broke down in her office, and Melissa's statement about her own history with Derek. With all of that, Lisa filed a petition for a temporary protective order and initiated divorce proceedings at the same time. It felt surreal watching her assemble everything. The paperwork was thick, clinical, full of legal phrasing that didn't match the chaos that had led to it. But when the judge granted the temporary order, exclusive occupancy of the townhouse, no contact outside lawyers, restricted access to firearms and company equipment, the weight I'd been carrying for months shifted, just a little. Derek, of course, acted like the order was optional. By the time I left the hardware store, my phone buzzed with more texts, each one technically a violation. Cute. Really cute. You think a piece of paper will stop me? You're nothing without me. Nothing. Come home and fix this before it gets worse for you. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I just forwarded them to Lisa, who forwarded them to the court and CC'd Gavin at HR. No arguments, no explanations, just quiet documentation. Later, she called me. Every text he sends helps us, she said simply. Let him dig. I moved back into the townhouse 2 days after the order went through. Unlocking the door felt strange, like stepping into a house that remembered me but didn't recognize me anymore. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and dust. Without Derek's heavy cologne and louder-than-necessary presence, the place felt hollow. Naomi met me there, carrying a clipboard and a bag of door wedges. "We're going to make this place safe," she said, walking through each room like she'd been doing it for years. Safer than he ever made it. We checked windows, rearranged furniture, noted blind spots of the old security system. Every step felt like reclaiming square inches of the life he'd taken up too much space in. When the locksmith arrived, I watched him remove the old locks Derek had installed himself, the ones he was so proud of. With each turn of the drill, I felt something inside me loosen. Fear, maybe, or obligation, or whatever tie had kept me standing in that kitchen the night he hit me. I packed the last of Derek's clothes into cardboard boxes, shirts he ironed obsessively, gym shorts he left everywhere, shoes lined up like trophies. His lawyer could arrange a pickup time. My hands didn't shake while I folded the last sweater. When the house was finally quiet, Naomi hugged me goodbye and promised to check in that evening. The door clicked shut behind her, and for a moment all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the kitchen clock. I stepped into the kitchen, the same corner where everything in my life had tilted off its axis weeks earlier. I pressed my palm to the counter. Smooth, cool, familiar. The spot where his ring had scraped my cheek flashed through my mind, but this time it didn't make my stomach drop. It made my spine straighten. This, all of this, was justice. Not dramatic confrontations, not shouting, not revenge fantasies whispered into pillows. Real justice came in the form of paperwork, signatures, case numbers, court seals, locks changed, evidence preserved, silence where his voice used to be. I ran my fingers along the counter one more time and whispered to no one, This is what serving justice really looks like. Today I understand that quiet consequences echo far louder than any slap ever could. The hearing room felt smaller than I expected, too small for the weight of everything that had happened. The wood paneling was scratched near the corners, the carpet worn thin along the aisle where people had paced through their own unraveling marriages. The judge sat high above us, her expression steady, unimpressed, like she'd seen this exact story in 100 different faces. I sat beside Aunt Lisa at one table. Derek sat across the aisle at the other. Perfect suit, perfect tie, perfect posture. He wore the same expression he used at work when a client complained, pained, bewildered, softly offended, as if he were the one being unfairly accused. His attorney started with a smooth voice and a sympathetic tilt of the head. "Your Honor, my client would like to return to his home. The incident Mrs. Morgan references was mutual conflict, not abuse. She is exaggerating in an attempt to gain favorable standing in the divorce." The words stung, even though I expected them. Mutual conflict, exaggerating, advantage. Derek stared at me with that same calm expression he used when telling friends, jokingly, that I was so emotional. He even folded his hands neatly like a model husband waiting to resume his duties. Then Lisa stood. Her voice didn't tremble. Not once. She moved with controlled precision as she opened her laptop and pressed play on the breakfast recording. Derek's voice filled the small room, louder than it had been that morning in our kitchen. "Don't be dramatic. It was just a slap. You pushed me. You'll make things worse. Stop acting abused. Don't wind me up like that." Each line echoed off the walls, off the judge's bench, off the brittle quiet that suddenly stretched across the entire room. Derek's attorney shifted in his seat. Even the court clerk looked up from her paperwork. When the audio ended, Lisa closed the laptop with a gentle click that felt louder than any of it. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Morgan, do you dispute that this is your voice?" Derek's jaw twitched. He drew in a shaky breath. I was under stress. It was an isolated incident. She knows how to push my buttons. I didn't mean—" Lisa didn't let him finish. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "there is also security footage." She cued the clip. The muted video played on the monitor beside the judge. Derek advancing, my body jerking sideways, his arms swinging, the unmistakable force behind it. Then she slid forward Melissa's statement, summarizing the prior protective order, the withdrawn petition, the pattern, a pattern. Derek's attorney pressed his lips into a thin line. Derek's face flushed red. The judge turned her gaze to him again. "Mr. Morgan, this does not look isolated. It looks consistent." That was when Derek snapped. He leaned past his attorney, eyes wide, voice rising. "She's lying," he spat. "You don't understand. She provoked me. She's twisting everything. Derek," his attorney hissed, tugging at his sleeve. "Stop talking." But he didn't. He kept going. Accusations tumbling out, all the charm stripped away. His voice cracked through the room like splintering wood. "You're ruining me, Claire." "Liar," he barked, loud enough that the bailiff straightened and shifted his stance. The judge's eyes sharpened, cutting through his spiral. "Mr. Morgan, you will not address her directly in this courtroom. Sit down." He froze at the tone. The real Derek, the one I knew too well, had finally surfaced in front of everyone. By the end of the hearing, the judge's ruling was crisp and clear. The protective order was extended and strengthened. I was granted temporary exclusive use of the house and my business equipment. Derek was warned that any contact outside legal channels would bring immediate consequences. As we gathered our things, Derek glared at me with a fury that looked unfamiliar now, not powerful, not intimidating, just exposed, like he'd spent years building a mask and had watched it shatter in 20 minutes. But I didn't look away. I didn't shrink. Because the only words echoing in my mind were the judge's, steady and resolute. "Ms. Morgan, you are not required to live in fear in your own home." Today I know those were the first words that made me believe I never had to go back to the life he controlled. The last time Derek raised his voice in my kitchen, he did it from the doorstep, with 2 officers standing between us. And even then, even with the bad-shaped boundary keeping him out, he still acted like he was the one in charge. He wasn't. Not anymore. It happened a week after the hearing. I was unloading groceries, paper bags rustling on the counter, Baxter's nails clicking across the tile, when a hard, familiar pounding rattled the front door. The kind that wasn't just a knock, but a demand, a warning, a claim. I froze. The protective order had been clear. No contact, no showing up, no surprises. Still, I already knew who it was. I checked the new security feed on my phone, my system, not the one he installed. The camera caught Derek on the porch, jaw clenched, eyes wild. He looked both furious and triumphant, like he believed the sheer force of his presence should override a court order. "Claire!" he shouted, pounding again. "Open the door! I'm here for my stuff!" His stuff, conveniently forgetting his lawyer was supposed to schedule the pickup. I kept the chain on the door and cracked it just an inch, enough for my voice to pass through but nothing else. "Derek, you're violating the protective order. Your lawyer can arrange a pickup." "Oh, shut up with the legal crap," he snapped. "You're stealing my things. You're hiding behind cops and judges like a coward." Hiding, coward, stealing. It was like hearing a remix of every belittling thing he'd ever said to me, just with louder bass. My hands shook, but I did exactly what Naomi and Aunt Lisa had drilled into me. I closed the door, locked every lock, took a slow breath, then called 911. "My husband is here in violation of a protective order," I said, voice trembling but steady enough. "He's pounding on my door." The dispatcher assured me officers were on the way. I sat on the floor with Baxter pressed against my leg, his warm body grounding me while Derek continued yelling on the other side of the door. The chain rattled once, just a test, just to see if he could intimidate me into opening. I didn't move. By the time the officers arrived, Derek had shifted into his favorite mask, the reasonable man, hands lifted in faux innocence, voice syrupy sweet. "I didn't understand the order," he told them. "I just wanted to talk to my wife. We're going through a tough time, you know. She misinterprets things. She gets emotional." One of the officers raised an eyebrow. "Sir, it says very clearly you're not to come to this residence." Derek gestured to the door with frustration. "I didn't threaten her. I just want my things. She won't even talk to me." But the footage didn't lie. The doorbell camera had recorded every pound of his fist, every insult, every attempt to force his way into a life he no longer had access to. When the officers reviewed the clip and the texts he'd sent in violation of the order, their tone shifted. "Mr. Morgan," one said calmly, "please turn around." "What? Are you kidding?" Derek barked. "She's doing this to me. She's making me look like the bad guy." But he complied when the officer repeated the command. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, gentle, firm, final. As they led him down the walkway, he twisted to shout back at me through the open door, "Claire, you're going to regret this. You're doing this to me." But even then, even with his voice echoing off the townhouse walls, he didn't look powerful. He looked small, revealed, like he'd finally discovered the one thing he couldn't manipulate: consequences. I watched from the living room window as the patrol car pulled away. My emotions tangled inside me, grief for what my marriage had become, fear for what might still lie ahead, and a strange, startling lightness. This wasn't how I used to imagine my marriage ending, but it was exactly how I imagined my safety beginning. Later that night, with the house quiet again, I baked an extra batch of cinnamon rolls for the cafe. The warmth of the oven, the soft thud of dough on the counter, the cinnamon filling melting into spirals, it all anchored me back into myself. I boxed up a few for the officers at the precinct, writing a small thank you note. I couldn't control Derek. I couldn't control the past. But I could control who received the sweetness of my work, and who never would again. Derek always bragged that he could sell ice to a polar bear. But once the evidence made its rounds, HR, the court, the people who used to call him a friend, He couldn't even sell the story of himself as a decent man. His downfall didn't happen in one dramatic swoop. It happened in layers, slow and humiliating, like watching a salesman try every pitch he knows while the customer has already read the reviews. The HR investigation wrapped up 2 weeks after the conference room meeting. The email he received, one he later forwarded to half our mutual contacts, swearing it was biased, was cold and clinical. Your employment is terminated effective immediately for violation of conduct standards and reputational harm to the company. Reputational harm. Their euphemism for, you hit your wife on camera using our product, and now we all know who you really are. I heard from someone in accounting that his supervisor couldn't even look at him when he came to turn in his badge. Another coworker told me Derek tried to charm the receptionist on the way out, pretending none of it mattered. She didn't smile back. Word spread quietly through the home security industry, the way everything spreads in mid-sized cities, through LinkedIn searches, whispers between managers, a forwarded article here and there. Employers Googled him and found enough hints, case numbers, restraining order summaries, HR filings, to close doors before he even knocked. Jobs he used to call guaranteed suddenly didn't return his emails. He told a mutual acquaintance over drinks that he was being blacklisted by feminists. Apparently, that was easier for him to believe than the truth. People just didn't want to hire a man whose violence had a digital timestamp. Even his friends began to peel away. The guys who once laughed at his jokes about overreacting wives didn't laugh now. Some distanced themselves quietly. Others confronted him. Not out of loyalty to me, but because the man they knew had been replaced by someone erratic, angry, self-pitying. His circle shrank to a few drinking buddies who entertained his rants until even they got tired of the same complaint loop. She ruined my life. It was just one time. Nobody believes men anymore. Consequences kept piling on. The fines from his violation of the protective order weren't small. The legal fees from the divorce were worse, and the mandatory batterer intervention program? That was the one he complained about the most. He had to show up every week, on time, participate, admit things he didn't want to admit. If he skipped, he risked further charges. I heard from Lisa that he tried to argue with the facilitator during his first session and was nearly kicked out. The version of Derek who always believed he was the smartest man in the room didn't know how to survive a place where no one cared about his charm. His parents were the last to face reality. They'd been furious with me at first, calling me dramatic, insisting I just talk it out, repeating every tired line Derek must have fed them. But curiosity got the better of them, and they attended one of his intervention sessions as observers. He must have lost control in front of them too, or maybe hearing other men talk openly about their violence cracked something in them. They never offered a full apology, but they stopped calling me to help him calm down. They stopped sending me long texts about saving the marriage. They started referring to the protective order as the situation instead of the misunderstanding. Meanwhile, my life, quietly, steadily, began to grow. Bakery orders increased. The smell of cinnamon and fresh bread became my daily rhythm instead of the tension of policing Derek's moods. Mr. Huang hung a small sign above my pastries at the cafe. Morgan's Mornings. Warm, homemade, resilient. Customers began asking about catering. A few regulars, mostly women, leaned in at the register and murmured, "I heard you went through something. I'm glad you're okay." One even wiped her eyes and whispered that she'd left her own husband years ago and wished she'd been as brave. I never told them the whole story. I didn't need to. They understood. And Derek... Well, Derek faded in the opposite direction. He wasn't a dramatic villain defeated in some cinematic showdown. He wasn't destroyed in a blaze of punishment. He was simply exposed. His actions, no longer hidden behind charm or gaslighting, finally attached themselves to him. People saw him, really saw him, and he had to live with that version of himself, the one he'd spent years making sure no one would ever believe. Looking at his life from a distance, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't even feel angry anymore. What I saw was a man whose choices had finally stopped being everybody else's secret, and whose consequences for once finally belonged only to him. The first morning I sat at my own kitchen table, a warm cinnamon roll steaming on a chipped ceramic plate, I almost didn't recognize the feeling settling over my shoulders. It wasn't adrenaline. It wasn't dread. It wasn't the tight, buzzing alertness I used to wake up with, wondering what version of Derek I'd get that day. It was peace. Quiet, steady, unfamiliar peace. The condo felt different now that it was fully mine. Boxes had disappeared, replaced by soft touches I added slowly as the months unfolded. New curtains I'd chosen without being mocked for my taste, a secondhand bookshelf I painted myself, a small rug that didn't have to match anyone else's preferences. The kitchen was smaller than the townhouse, but every drawer held only what I put in it. Every spoon had a spot because I chose it. The legal settlement helped. My growing business helped more. Piece by piece, I renovated the condo. Fresh paint over scuffed walls, a new stovetop that didn't spark, open shelving for my baking tools. I paid for everything myself, and every receipt felt like a step further from the version of me who used to ask permission to buy parchment paper. My mornings shifted too. Gone were the days of cooking to Derek's schedule, scrambling eggs before his commute, timing toast to his impatience, listening to him critique the crispness like it mattered more than my sleep. Now I cooked because I wanted to. I tested recipes at sunrise, barefoot on cool tile, soft indie music playing instead of the harsh morning news Derek had always insisted on blaring. The sun streamed through the blinds, warming the counter where trays of muffins cooled. My notebook lay open beside them, dotted with scribbles about spice ratios and glaze textures. Baking wasn't an appeasement anymore. It was craft. It was expression. It was mine. Aunt Lisa helped me formalize everything: my bookkeeping, my cottage kitchen license, my separate business account. She slid documents across her dining table the same way she had slid tissues toward me that first day in her office. Independent income is independent freedom, she told me. She was right. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest and stable. No hidden passwords, no condescending commentary about cute hobbies. Just my work, my effort, my earnings. Then Naomi invited me to speak at a support group. Not because you're a victim, she said over the phone, but because you're a step ahead. Sometimes that's all someone needs to see. I baked a box of bright lemon muffins and brought them to a church basement where folding chairs formed a shaky circle. When I shared parts of my story, my voice softer than I expected, women looked at me the way Melissa once had looked at me. With recognition, with heartbreak, with relief that someone finally said what they'd been afraid to name. I watched their faces shift at certain details, the passwords, the belittling jokes, the "you're overreacting," and I understood just how invisible the first cracks of abuse can be until they aren't. Not every day was good. Some nights, a neighbor's door slammed too loudly and my whole body flinched before my mind caught up. Other times, a letter from court appeared in my mailbox, and my hands shook, opening it, even when it was just routine paperwork. Therapy helped. It untangled instinct from danger, past from present. Healing wasn't cinematic. It was small moments, repeated until they became a life. One morning, months after everything, I sat with a mug of coffee warming my palms. The kitchen filled with early sun, my dog snored gently against the back door, and my cooling rack was crowded with pastries waiting to be delivered to the cafe. I looked around, the faded rocking chair in the corner, the sunlight slicing across the countertop, the cinnamon lingering in the air, and realized something I hadn't noticed happening. I wasn't imagining scenes of justice anymore. I wasn't replaying arguments in my head or drafting comebacks or picturing Derek's face when he finally understood what he'd done. I wasn't living in reaction. I was just living. Living a life where breakfast belonged to me. A life where peace didn't have to be earned through silence. A life without eggshells underfoot. My husband laid a hand on me once. The next morning, I served him breakfast, and without knowing it, I also started serving him consequences. But the real justice, the kind that doesn't burn out or backfire or require anyone else's downfall, is what I serve myself every single day now. This morning, I sat at my tiny dining table, the one that wobbles slightly if I lean too hard on the edge, while my laptop chimed with new pastry orders. Sunlight crept slowly across the floor, warming Baxter's fur as he snored under my chair. The condo smelled like vanilla and rising dough, and suddenly my mind drifted back to that first slap. Not the impact, not the pain, though I still remember the sting, but the shock. The shame that settled like dust. The instant instinct to hide it with makeup, excuses, minimized words. It wasn't that bad. He didn't mean it. I pushed him. The little lies I used to tell myself that made the bruise easier to carry than the truth. Back then, silence felt safer than admitting what had happened. Today I know better. Silence would have been the punishment I handed myself, not the protection I used to pretend it was. Speaking up wasn't just about punishing him. It was about refusing to keep living inside a story he wrote, one where my fear made sense and his temper did too. I didn't just tell my aunt or the hotline or the police. I told myself the truth, and that was the first crack in the cage. I still have the security footage saved, tucked away in a secure digital folder, the breakfast recording too. I don't watch them. I don't need to. They exist the way old scars do. Quiet, permanent reminders of what healed, not wounds to reopen. Sometimes people ask why I left. They tilt their heads, expect a list, some dramatic confession, but I don't catalog every insult or every bruise they couldn't see. I just say, he hit me once, and I believed him when he showed me who he was. Then I tell them about the condo, the business, Baxter snoring under my table, and the quiet mornings where no one criticizes how I brew my coffee or how I breathe. Derek's shadow still exists, somewhere in the same city. I know that. Probation check-ins, job interviews that don't pan out, maybe a new apartment with neighbors who don't know what he did. But I don't track him. I don't refresh court records every night. I don't stalk his social media. My life stopped reacting to his the moment he stopped having a key to it. This morning I slid a tray of golden pastries from the oven. Sugar crackled softly on top, filling the kitchen with warm, sweet air. The kind of smell that settles into your hair and clothes and feels like safety. And while I arranged them on cooling racks, something simple and profound settled in my chest. This is justice, too. A life where no voice rises in anger at me. Where no one grabs my wrist or blocks a doorway. Where no one has access to my passwords, my money, my calendar, or my peace. A life where the only thing I serve in the mornings is food. To people who appreciate it, to customers who smile, to the officers who once protected me, to women who understand, and to myself most of all. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it smells like cinnamon and fresh coffee. Sometimes it is simply a life rebuilt, breath by breath, dish by dish, morning by morning. Today I understand that the truest justice is freedom. The ordinary, unremarkable kind that feels like breathing without bracing.